So as promised, I wanted to make this video to better articulate my exact thoughts on the story of The Last of Us Part 2. I couldn't go over this with my other video with it being spoiler free, but I still wanted to elaborate on important story beats. Now before we get started, I do want to go over some basic things. Number 1, spoilers are ahead not only for The Last of Us Part 2, but for the first game as well. We are going to break down some major plot points of both games, so I would highly recommend you play them both before watching this video. Add it to your watch list and come back later once you've beaten them both. If you don't care about spoilers, then that's on you. There's another video that I've made giving my thoughts on The Last of Us Part 2, which is spoiler free, so if you're looking for that, I've linked it in the description below. Number 2, everything I am about to say is strictly my opinion. You might disagree, and that's okay. Just add your arguments to the comments below and let's debate. In that same breath, I want to remind everyone to give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to be notified on all new uploads. If you watched my other video, then you know that I overall liked The Last of Us Part 2. Its gameplay was great, but the story could have been better. There were a few missteps narratively, and I think it really prevented the game from being the best it could be. I do want to be a little self-aware for a moment and say that I do think overall The Last of Us Part 2 story is good for the most part. I say this because at the end of this video, when I remind you that I still kind of like the story after putting the stuff I don't like on blast, it's going to make me sound contradicting or hypocritical. I'm just letting you know I'm aware of this, but I still stand by my opinions. With that said, I want to give one final spoiler warning because they are truly starting right now. So let's get into the first point I want to bring up, which is Joel and his untimely end. Joel is a guy that has been through a lot. He lost his daughter Sarah at the start of a deadly outbreak, spent 20 years doing morally questionable things in order to survive. He then meets this kid named Ellie who turns out to be immune to this virus and could be the key to saving the human race. So he spends a year traveling with Ellie in an effort to bring her to a group of people known as the Fireflies who believe they can use Ellie to create a cure and save the world. The only problem is that during the year or so of traveling with Ellie, bonding with her, and seeing her as a daughter, Joel becomes very protective of her. When he finds out that the surgery needed to create said cure will kill Ellie, he decides that he isn't going to let that happen. He stops the surgery from happening, killing any Firefly in his way. He then lies to Ellie, telling her that the Fireflies simply couldn't develop a cure. 4 years later, at the start of this game, former Fireflies have tracked Joel down. They torture him for a while before killing him in front of Ellie. So this is the first point I want to talk about, and I'm probably going to upset some people when I say that Joel's death, while tragic and upsetting, doesn't make sense narratively. More plainly, Joel's death didn't anger me like it did with many other fans. I of course didn't want it to happen, and it made me sad when it did, but the game got the desired reaction from me. I was angry at the characters of the game, not the game's developers. I didn't think the game sucked because they killed off a fan favorite or the arguable face of the franchise. When we are placed in the shoes of Ellie and witness the death of Joel, we as players are meant to feel exactly what Ellie feels in that moment. Joel's death could have been heroic and noble, but the desired effect was to make it seem as if it were unfair. Joel was taken away in such a brutal and sudden way that we are left with a sour taste in our mouths. We react pissed off at the developers for taking Joel away, but everything we are feeling is exactly what Ellie feels in that moment. And I never believed that Joel was going to be in this game a lot. I didn't think he was going to die, but I figured that this was going to be Ellie's game. If anything, Joel was going to play a minor supporting role. So it wasn't that surprising that Joel had been killed off early on. I know it takes away from the hope of seeing those awesome Joel and Ellie moments like from the first game, but they are still there, just in the form of flashbacks, which we will come back to. The theme of The Last of Us is all about loss, whether that's feeling the immediate sense of unfairness as Ellie watches Joel die, or about how Joel handled the death of his own daughter Sarah. His grief consumes him, turning him into the man that we all see at the start of the first game.
I'm sorry about your daughter, Joel, but I have lost people too.
You have no idea what loss is.
When Naughty Dog explained the role of Joel to his voice actor Troy Baker, they explained it as Joel is a man with not many moral lines left to cross. As if to say that during the 20 years of the apocalypse, Joel became a hardened survivor who has done things that he's not proud of.
This is how you gonna repay me, huh?
Repay you?
For all those goddamn years I took care of us.
Took care. That's what you call it? I got nothing but nightmares from those years.
You survived because of me.
It wasn't worth it.
Joel is not a caring father figure when he meets Ellie. He's pissed off that he has to babysit this kid and is totally willing to just leave her to fend for herself.
You're not my daughter. And I sure as hell ain't your dad. And we are going our separate ways.
By the time he reaches the end, he had developed as a character. He no longer cares for just himself. He looks to this girl as his own, ready and willing to put his own life on the line to save hers. Finally accepting the loss of his daughter when he accepts the photo of Sarah when it's given to him by Ellie at the end versus when he returns it to Tommy earlier in the game. Joel begins to refer to Ellie as baby girl and kiddo, officially becoming that caring father figure that we all fell in love with. But as soon as Joel learns to care for Ellie as his own, the Fireflies tell him that this is going to be taken away from him. Within moments, the switch in his head is flipped as the hardened survival instincts trigger, and Joel allows his more brutal nature to take control, all in an effort to protect what he had just gained. He is terrified of losing another daughter, and he'll do whatever he feels like he needs to do in order to keep that from happening, even if that means killing doctors in a hospital. When we see Joel in the sequel, he is at the end of his life. There is no additional story or adventure for him. His peaceful life in Jackson was, in my opinion, his last stop. There was no other fight for him after that. He had been through so much already. And look, I know people don't like the argument of Joel becoming soft, which is why he walks into an ambush with Abby and her fellow ex-Fireflies, but he does. If Joel from the first game is the same Joel here, he would never put himself in a situation where he is outnumbered and surrounded, regardless of who it is. He barely trusted Henry and Sam when they first met. Joel at the start of the first game and Joel at the start of the second game are two different Joels. The Joel that we get is one that is more trusting and respectful than the one from like 4 or 5 years prior. When he and Tommy are surrounded by infected, they see Abby and their first instinct is to help the person in need. Of course, she in turn saves them, but there was no reason for Joel to not trust Abby after what they had just been through. When they meet the rest of the group, their intention is to bring them all back to Jackson so that they can regroup and resupply, because that's what they've done for the last 4 years. Jackson isn't a closed-off fortress with armed guards and threats of shooting anyone that gets close. It is a community that is open to trading and welcoming to the outside world. And it's not like Joel totally forgets about his years of survival instincts, it's just that Abby and her group don't fit the profile of the kind of people Joel knows to look out for. They aren't hunters or cannibals or whatever, they're just people that happen to have a bad idea in mind, but there's no way Joel would have known that. And of course Fireflies were going to eventually seek retribution for what happened in Salt Lake City. As soon as Abby shoots Joel, I knew immediately that they were Fireflies. There was no way that Joel got them on. Those that survived most certainly were going to seek out Joel and possibly even Ellie. Am I happy that Joel died? Of course not, but I understand why it happened. Do I wish he had a more noble or heroic death? Of course I do, but this is a post-apocalyptic world, and very, very few deaths are going to be good ones. It is a brutal and unforgiving world, obviously. But let's talk about Ellie for a moment, because she is the driving force for most of this game. One of the things that I was most looking forward to with The Last of Us Part 2 is in finding out when or how Ellie was going to learn the truth about what happened at the hospital in Salt Lake City. We know at the start of the game that there is tension between Joel and Ellie. We aren't quite sure why this is the case, but I personally thought it was because of some natural father-daughter stuff, like Joel is being overprotective and is starting to piss off Ellie because she's capable, but it turns out it's because by the time the second game starts, Ellie has already learned the truth about what happened. So first red flag right here, because this was something that did honestly annoy me. One of the things with writing is that you don't want the point of view character to know more than the player knows, to an extent anyway. While I sat there wondering when and how she was going to find out, turns out it already happened in between games. Through flashbacks, we see that Ellie has her doubts about Joel's story. She suspects that there is more than what he's saying, so on occasion she calls him out on it, but he continues to lie to her. Eventually, her instincts lead her back to the hospital in Salt Lake City, where she finds a recording and learns that they could have developed a cure, essentially confirming that Joel has been lying to her. So for the final time, she demands Joel tell her the truth, which he finally does, and it causes a rift within the relationship.
I was supposed to die in that hospital. My life would have mattered. But you took that from me.
While this is very heartbreaking, I can't help but think about what could have been. What if Ellie didn't know at the start of the game? How would this have changed the story? For one, Ellie and Joel wouldn't have had tension at the start of the game. Most of the flashbacks wouldn't have been these awkward exchanges as Ellie questions things that Joel has told her for the past 4 years. We would have gotten more moments like the museum scene, which is far and beyond my favorite scene of the whole franchise. We could see more of the father-daughter dynamic many were hoping to have seen. Taking it a step further, while players would know about the truth behind what happened at the hospital and make educated guesses as to Abby's motives, seeing Ellie not know would be interesting as she struggles to put the pieces together. Conversations like the one with Nora in the lower levels of the Seattle hospital would have had more weight to it. When Nora saw Ellie breathing spores, she instantly figures out that Ellie is the girl, the immune girl, the one that the Fireflies meant to operate on. When Ellie picks up on this, it confirms that the people who killed Joel were Fireflies. But if Ellie didn't know, it would spark an interesting conversation. Ellie would wonder why the Fireflies of all people had hunted down Joel. Did this have anything to do with the hospital in Salt Lake? This would obviously bring back Ellie's old doubts about Joel's story to her, confirming that she knew something was off about it. So when Nora says things like,
"Think about what he did. How many people are dead because of him?
Those lines could have carried more weight because Ellie wouldn't have known. And imagine how she would have handled it when she finally learned what Joel did. With Joel dead, it makes it impossible to have the argument with him, while Ellie's image of her father figure starts crumbling down. And yes, if Joel was still alive, this would make the realization more impactful because we could see the relationship that we had now spent 2 games on fall apart before our eyes. But none of this happened. Instead, while we eagerly awaited the moment she learns the truth, we find out, well, she knew the whole time, so we're left like, oh. Well, that's lame. I think it removes a lot of the impact of this big plot element that the first game sets up. So I was a bit disappointed with the handling of how Ellie learned the truth, but it isn't the first time that the game mishandles information given to the players. Early on in the game, you randomly take control of a new character named Abby. We don't know that this character is the next Firefly right away, nor do we realize that we are playing the other star of this game. During Abby's first scene, she speaks with a guy named Owen, who eventually reveals that someone named Mel is pregnant. A small detail, but one that comes in later. So after Joel's death, Ellie goes on a warpath with Dina to hunt down those responsible. Ellie is gunning for Abby, but she has to go after her friends in order to get to her. Through Nora, Ellie learns that Abby has been hiding out at the Seattle Aquarium, so she goes there to find her. She is met by Alice, as well as Owen and Mel. While we don't know much about these characters yet, we do know 2 things. They're both part of the group that killed Joel, and the woman Mel is pregnant. So when Ellie eventually kills Mel, we, the players, know in that moment that she is pregnant and immediately start feeling the dread. But how much more impactful would it have been if we didn't know, like Ellie didn't know? Because we could feel the dread along with Ellie in that moment. So I think it was another missed opportunity for the game to explore. Now keep this scene in mind when we talk about it later in this video because it's going to be important when we come back to it. But let's move on to another part of the game. I mentioned in my other video that there was a part of the game where you are led to believe it is wrapping up but instead keeps going. In that video I said that I was initially happy when this happened from a gameplay standpoint, but let's look at this from a narrative standpoint. While in Seattle, Ellie, Dina, and Jesse use the theater as a base of operations while they conduct their search for Abby. After the aquarium scene, Ellie returns to the theater and is confronted by Abby, who learns of Ellie's killing of her friends. The game presents this as the big final confrontation as Abby suddenly kills Jesse, and threatens to kill Tommy, who was also there to kill Abby to avenge his brother Joel. Keep this in mind because we will also come back to it. But just before we see how this confrontation concludes, the game puts us in control of Abby as we now go through her side of the story. So from a gameplay side of things, I was happy with this because by the time the confrontation at the theater happens, I felt that the game was too short and I was not ready for it to wrap up. I wanted to keep playing more, and when the game showed us that it had no plans of wrapping up anytime soon, I was happy to still be playing the game. However, looking at this from a narrative side of things, putting us in the shoes of the antagonist of the story was a bit odd. At this point, Abby has the deck stacked against her. She has killed Joel and Jesse, is currently threatening to kill Tommy, and of course is at odds with our girl Ellie. Chief among it all is that this is supposed to be Ellie's game, so why the f would I want to play as Abby right now? So the game begins to exhaust you narratively as it forces you to go through Abby's perspective and learn her side of things. Here's the thing though, I honestly think it worked for the most part. It painted Joel and Ellie in a much darker light, which I think is more of a shade of gray, seeing as we the players are a bit biased towards them, but learning about Abby's father and how he was the surgeon that Joel guns down in the operating room and what that does to Abby, how the desire for revenge morphs her into a super buffed out killing machine, that she builds herself up for the purpose of killing Joel, and when that's done, what is left that defines her? It isn't until we meet the characters of Yara and Lev do we start to see more of a caring side to Abby. With Lev in particular, we see Abby question her convictions to the Washington Liberation Front. She begins to see their conflict with the Seraphites in a different light. The moment where Abby turns to Lev and tells him he is her people is a character-defining moment for her. For the first time, Abby has something else to define her other than revenge. Through her, we get some much-needed world building as she answers a lot of the questions with the WLF and the scars that we still have from playing as Ellie. Call me a sucker, but through it all, Abby's story won me over. I no longer saw her as simply the villain of the story. I started to sympathize with her side of things. I was no longer entirely on Ellie's side. I regretted the killing of Owen, Mel, and Nora, and while I still resent Abby for killing Joel, at least I understand why she did it. This is a post-apocalyptic world, so brutal justice is going to get dished out whether you like it or not. By the time we catch back up to the confrontation at the theater, I no longer wanted to see Ellie and Abby fight. I just wanted them to go their separate ways, and they did, but not before the game tore everything apart for me. And so here it is. This is one of the many reasons why I feel like this game did not stick the landing. It's the big moment that ruins a lot of the story for me. During the fight between Abby and Ellie in the theater, Ellie ends up losing the fight. As she's being beaten down, Dina jumps in to help. Abby turns the tables on Dina and starts bashing her head into the floor before pulling out a knife to slice her throat. But before she does this, Ellie informs Abby that Dina is pregnant. We as the players have already learned about this, but this is the first time that Abby learns of it. When she hears this, Abby's response is,
Good.
It's one word. Just one word, but in that context, destroys everything for me in that moment. It tells me exactly what Abby is. As much as she wanted to avenge her father and her friends, as much as she found new purpose in wanting to keep Lev safe, we learn that deep down, at her core, Abby is truly a terrible person. All of the effort to make me see things from Abby's side, teach me to sympathize with her, it all dissolves away when Abby is so ready and so willing to kill a pregnant woman just to spite someone else. If you couldn't get past Abby killing Joel, then Abby's willingness to kill Dina will just send you over the edge. It really damages the goodwill gained for her character. The game wants you to think Abby is a character that is good at heart, but it's misguided in the same way that Ellie is. Anger and the desire for revenge consumes these characters as they do the terrible things that they do. This fits with the overall theme of loss for the franchise, but when Abby's response to learning about Dina's pregnancy is good, it's just really hard for me to see the light in a person like that. So for me, the game presents Abby as an example of what happens when you fall too far. Abby may have had solid motivations when killing Joel, but killing Dina to spite Ellie is just borderline evil. Abby doesn't fit the mindset of a good person doing a bad thing. Instead, the reverse is true. Abby is a bad person who does the occasional good thing. The only reason why Abby doesn't go through with it is because Lev stops her. Now I get the idea here. After living the last 4 years of her life being consumed by anger and vengeance, Abby forms a real connection with Lev. He sort of acts as a moral anchor for Abby. When she's in neck deep in the thought of revenge, it's Lev that is able to snap her out of it, giving her an opportunity to really think about what she's doing and not only spare Dina, but spare Ellie as well. And I can't help but wonder what would have happened if Lev wasn't there. Abby most likely would have killed Dina. She wouldn't have had that snapping out of it moment. The biggest problem is that I can't look past this moment for Abby. All because of that one word, I'm forced to look back at everything I had been through with her, and I realized that on more than one occasion, the game presents example after example of all the crappy things Abby has done. When you really think about the killing of Joel on the surface, Abby may have had all the motivation after Joel killed her father, who was just trying to develop a cure for mankind, but Abby still beats and tortures an old man with a golf club, then decides to go for the killing blow despite hearing the cries of his daughter begging them to stop while she watches just feet away. Fast forward a bit and you have the love triangle of Abby, Owen, and Mel. I buy there's a connection between Abby and Owen, and the fact that Abby might still have some lingering feelings for Owen despite the fact that he's moved on to be with Mel is more or less relatable, but it loses me again when Abby completely disregards Mel in this situation to be with Owen regardless. I mean, Mel is pregnant with Owen's child, yet Owen is being unfaithful, and I ultimately feel bad for Mel. No wonder she resents Abby throughout the game.
I haven't always done the right thing.
You're a piece of Abby.
Abby isn't a character without emotion because we see her mourn Owen's death, but not before she walks right by the lifeless body of Mel. Not even a single tear shed for her or her unborn child. All of these things added up makes Abby a bad person who is occasionally good versus Ellie, who is a good person that does the occasional bad thing. Case in point is how these two characters react in the same situation. When Ellie killed Mel, she didn't know Mel was pregnant. We see how it affects her when she learns about it after the fact. She collapses on the ground and nearly throws up. Hell, it wasn't even Ellie who started that fight. Yeah, she came in holding the gun, but she tells both Owen and Mel that all she wants is Abby's location. Ellie only shoots Owen after he goes for the gun. The killing of Mel happens when Mel, who is again in love with Owen and carrying his child, lashes out at Ellie after he's been shot. Both of these are in self-defense and not out of malice. And I get that Abby doesn't realize any of this, but I can at least guess that if Ellie knew Mel was pregnant, she would have spared her. In fact, she tried to spare both of them. Yet when Abby learns of Dina's pregnancy, she simply doesn't care. In fact, she's happy when she finds out, and that's just up. So with my new realization of Abby's true colors, I was once again back on Ellie's side. Now seeing Abby as a lost soul who is truly the antagonist of the story, I was ready to see Ellie rip into Abby. Yet after this, the game had them both go their separate ways. After Lev stops Abby from killing Dina, she looks at Ellie and says that she doesn't want to see her ever again. Then we flash forward where Ellie has this dream storybook ending with Dina. They have a farm with sheep, Dina has given birth to the adorable JJ, and they are living life as a happy little family. Ellie is embracing her love for art and music, and I thought for a moment that this was a dream sequence, like it was too good to be true. When I found out that it was real, I wanted the game to just end there. Yeah, I wanted Abby dead, but at least Ellie found her peace. Turns out, nope, this isn't the end. Tommy shows up saying that he found Abby and asks for Ellie to go after her again, to leave her life behind and hunt down Abby in his place. Because of the confrontation with Abby, Tommy has been severely hurt and can't do it himself. But it's just weird to me to see Tommy asking Ellie to go on this revenge quest again. Personally, I think that this was a heavy switch with Tommy and felt out of character. I get that he was driven by the same vengeance as Ellie after Joel's death, but I always felt that Tommy went ahead to Seattle to hunt down Abby so that Ellie wouldn't. At the start of the game, immediately after Joel's death, Tommy tries to convince Ellie not to leave Jackson to go hunting for Abby. When it's clear that she isn't going to listen, he tells his wife Maria that he's going to go ahead to find Abby himself and to tell Ellie to stay put.
Ellie's gonna try to come after me, but stop her. Take her guns, lock up the horses, maybe lock her up.
Of course, Maria then lets Ellie go after Tommy in the hopes that she'll bring him back. When Ellie and Tommy reunite, they make a decision to go back to Jackson together. Mainly at this point because Dina is sick and pregnant and needs to go back. But in my mind, Tommy goes ahead to Seattle to find Abby in the hopes that Ellie wouldn't follow him. When she does, he reverses course and prioritizes the safety and well-being of the kids over his own vengeance. These character traits all go out the window when Tommy shows up to the farm and asks for Ellie to leave her perfect life to go hunting for Abby again. What? Tommy, who has normally been the sympathizer, the same character that tried to convince Joel to not seek out the Fireflies in the first game, the one that held off infected while Joel and his daughter ran during Outbreak Day, the same person that put himself at risk because he didn't want Ellie to get herself killed going on the same quest, was now asking Ellie to go off on her own to do the very thing he didn't want her to do. Tommy is an asshole. So at this point, I'm just hoping Ellie doesn't leave. Don't leave Dina and JJ. I know she's struggling with post-traumatic stress and may feel that doing this is the only way to truly find peace, but she had it. She had the perfect ending. Instead, she leaves to once again kill Abby. This time for real. Right? So the game continues for one more level as Ellie navigates a new area and new enemies until she finds Abby and Lev, both captured, tortured, and left to die. Ellie saves them, but then demands that she fight Abby. At this point, I'm all about it, totally ready and willing to kill Abby. But what happens at the end? Ellie lets Abby go. Why? After everything, why do we let her go? Why did we leave the perfect farm life with Dina just to not kill Abby? So now at this point, Ellie returns to the farm with 2 less fingers than when she left, only to find that the farm is abandoned. Dina and JJ are both gone. The only thing left untouched is Ellie's room filled with her art and guitar. But since Ellie is now missing 2 fingers, she can no longer properly play the guitar. Her love of music is taken away. So now I'm left with a hollow feeling, which is exactly what this game feels like at the end. It feels hollow, and why? For the sake of having a depressing ending?
How is it that you're never scared?
Who says that I'm not?
What are you scared of?
Being by myself? I'm scared of ending up alone.
I can understand if Ellie does actually kill Abby at the end and then returns to the farm to find nothing. Then it leaves us with the mindset of, well, you got what you wanted, you got your revenge, but at what cost? Was it worth it? But that's not what we got. You leave everything behind for nothing, and it cost everything. You lost the best life for nothing. There's no 2 ways about it. It's a garbage ending. It's just straight bad. The whole game, its trials and tribulations meant nothing in the end. And where do you go from here? I barely want to see a sequel to this game. I'm on board for a prequel where you play as Joel during the 20-year gap after the outbreak to see him do the morally questionable things that we only ever hear about. I'm even on board for a story during the 4-year gap between games, something that threatens Jackson, and then we get to see more of the Joel and Ellie moments that we lacked during this game. I guess I could see another game where we see what happens next for Ellie just so that we can have a better ending than what part 2 leaves us with. One where maybe it ends with her finally giving her life to create the cure. I'm assuming her immunity still has value regardless of her age. I don't think I'd be interested in seeing a sequel starring Abby. I think it was a mistake having her being featured as much as she was in this game, which honestly would have had me if it didn't paint her as such a bad person. Again, it's that one line that I just can't get past. The Last of Us Part 2 should have been Ellie's game, and there is a way to condense this story by just telling us that Joel killed Abby's father and took away the possibility of a cure to give Abby all the motivation needed to be a believable villain. But when the game gives pretty much half the runtime to Abby instead of Ellie, you take away from what I really wanted to see. Yeah, you played with perception well, but you misstepped hard with that one line from Abby, which for me undoes a lot of what we had gained for her character. But when I take a hard look back at the entire story, I still stand by what I said. I think the majority of the story is good. I can't deny that until the end I was very engaged with the story. Joel's death got the desired reaction from me. I enjoyed Ellie's quest for vengeance and enjoyed her connection with Dina and Jesse. I enjoyed the heartwarming flashbacks between Joel and Ellie, though I wish there were more of them. Even when we flipped to Abby, I was able to get past the initial awkwardness and learn to sympathize with the character. I love how her perception helped build out the world, and I loved her arc with Yara and Lev. All of that works for me, and that's the majority of this game. It's the small little missteps that add up. The game's handling of how Ellie found out about Joel's lie, Abby's awkward love triangle with Mel and Owen, the way Abby is so happy to kill a pregnant Dina, which completely undoes all the goodwill I gained for her, and obviously there was the trash ending. The argument of things in the apocalypse don't end well just isn't good enough here. I would buy it if Ellie had actually killed Abby, but she didn't, and so the ending is just hollow to me. That all being said, the story of The Last of Us Part 2 is still good for the most part, but just has a few missteps and it doesn't stick the landing, as I said in my other video, which I stand by. I know endings can ruin a whole story, and I certainly don't blame you if you can't look past it, but for me, it's all about the journey, not the destination. It's the same argument I have for Game of Thrones and Mass Effect, two stories that are incredible, but have bad endings, and I would still recommend people check those things out with the warning of, the ending might piss you off. Last of Us 2 is in that same category, and let's not forget that the gameplay really helps this game out a lot. If the gameplay wasn't as good as it was, I don't know if I would recommend this game like I did. It's a shame because this could have been a much better game if they handled certain things differently. You could keep the game largely the same, but I would have had Ellie learn about the truth about what Joel did throughout her adventures in Seattle. I would have her kill Abby in the theater after that good line and get the happy ending at the farm. I would still have Tommy show up, but this time it would be to argue with Ellie about what Joel did, ultimately ending with Ellie finally accepting why Joel did what he did, cutting away after Ellie says,
Okay.
just like in the first game. That's just my opinion, and with that, I will end this very long rant. I may regret asking this, but let me know what you think of the story of The Last of Us Part 2 in the comments below. I think I'm ready to debate my points with anyone willing to argue their own. Also, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell icon to get notifications on all new video uploads. Also, consider checking out these other videos, one of which is my thoughts on the overall game in spoiler-free form, so check that out if you are so inclined. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.